seems to have this picture of Arabic people that is so myopic and singular and one note. Grandchildren of immigrants are suddenly waking up to their heritage and saying, wait, I don't want this to die with them. I want to be able to hold on to where I come from. My name is Audrey Assad, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. We're here in my home. I'm a singer-songwriter, musician, producer. People would find out who I was or find out my last name. 8 out of 10 times the next question was, any relation to the dictator?
You have a Syrian last name.
Yes.
I want to just dive right in. I want to hear about, as a little girl, take me back to 8-year-old, 9-year-old Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how you saw yourself in the world and how you were raised at home.
I grew up in a mixed ethnicity home. But my dad being Syrian and I was a first generation American kid. There was a strong cultural presence in the home. So we had a lot of the food, and my mom learned to speak Arabic and she learned to cook Arabic food. Yeah.
Wow.
And I know it was really kind of impressive when I think back to it, because she got married so young. Like, she was 18 when she married my dad and he was 25, and they moved to New Jersey where I grew up. And she didn't know anybody, and she was just immersed into his Arab community essentially.
Wow.
And so she adapted almost as if she had moved to another country in some way. So I am what I would call white passing. And that's language for essentially when someone passes me on the street, they think I'm white. That's what I am. I'm white skinned, that's what I am to them. And that comes with a whole host of assumptions, biases, or whatever their particular, inner world is like about that. So I have enjoyed that privilege my whole life, that I don't deal with the overt racism of colorism. That's not something that I have to fight in life, so that is a very privileged thing. What that also afforded me was the opportunity to hear people talk about Arabs and other minorities in front of me, not really thinking or understanding who I was and how I might hear that. And so early on, I would just notice the things that people would say. And I'm like, I feel like this can't be right. Is that? And internalized racism too in my own community. There was a lot of that kind of thing, negative talk about Arabs and Arab culture, or not necessarily the culture that we were living, but, stereotypes absorbed in my own community too. I heard that too growing up. And I would say I didn't talk about it really at all. So it was all happening in my mind, but I was very thoughtful about it, just really trying to understand why the world seems to, at least where I was raised in America, seems to have this picture of Arabic people that is so myopic and singular and one note. So when people would find out who I was or find out my last name, find out that it was Arabic, they would often go, oh, I didn't know that. And then 8 out of 10 times the next question was, any relation to the dictator? I'm like, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you
Did
think?
you ever say yes? Yes.
Oh, I tried a lot of different approaches. It's funny because I'm like, I can totally chuckle about it. I think I'm of the mind that these types of ignorant things that people say or do are most of the time so well intentioned. And I really don't personally take offense necessarily when someone says something that's a little insensitive like that, because there's so much worse things they could say. I'm like, we could work with this, it's not malicious. Of course, there have been other times where it's felt more insidious or more hurtful. For me, it's been a mixed bag of experiences in that way, where I don't experience colorism. I do experience racist things that people say about Arabs, but it does not impede me in life very much. Maybe occasionally someone doesn't want to give me some opportunity, but it's by far the exception. So I've had a sort of lucky existence in that way. And the last thing I'll say is all of that is true. And I feel a little lonely in the world because I don't know a lot of people who are living at that intersection that I live at. So when I find one of those people, I'm like, you know,
Totally.
you belong to me. Because it's just like you get it, you understand. And that feeling when you're in the majority is more common. You get it. We're rapping, like that's, and I have that with people for sure of all different types of identities, but there's a special thing that happens when you're like, wow, you have like the same list of experiences as I do.
For you in your position, just to be like, you're the daughter of a refugee, you're a first generation American.
Mhm.
Tell me your dad's experience. So he most likely was not, it wasn't as easy for him to come over here and just kind of like fade into the, you know,
Right.
um, what has that process been like for him? Do you remember him telling you stories about his experience as a little boy? Or
He's shared a little bit. From what I gather, there was a lot of pain there, a lot of hardship. And he came here when he was 18, so he had a full life before,
mm,
he got here, as far as like time to grow up somewhere and to really have that in your bones. And when he moved here, he was 18, like I said. He got a job like sweeping the floor of like a handbag factory. And it's such a crazy story to me. He just, I don't know if this is like personality or being a refugee or both, probably both. Just such drive, such resilience. I mean, that's a classic thing you hear people say about immigrants and refugees, right? Because often they don't have a choice but to be that way. So it's like it gets heroized and I'm like, it's kind of your only option
right.
unless you want to be miserable here. So you you have to be so willing and so determined, and so disciplined to get somewhere from that status often. It's hard to get out of poverty. It's difficult. It's not a thing that our country makes simple to do. He worked a job like that for a while, but then he ended up he hated it. And so he went to the guy who had sponsored him as a kid. And so he said, he doesn't really speak English at this point still or know the alphabet, but he's like, I want to do something else. I don't like this job. I don't like this kind of work. And the guy owned an insurance agency for State Farm, like a franchise of State Farm. And so he agreed to take my dad on, and basically he plastered the alphabet up on the wall and had my dad filing
I just feel it's
contracts.
just like it's so emotional to just hear you because it's just like this is not your great grandparents, it's not your parents,
Right.
this is your dad,
Right.
just
I know. It's
and
wild.
like I just can't imagine like someone say, okay, go learn the Arabic alphabet
I
and go figure
know.
out like what
And go like start working
and make money
today
and live.
using this thing and try to figure out if this matches that and then put that in that folder. Like that's what he was doing. And but he gave him that opportunity and my dad took to it really well. 7 months, he was their tops agent at the agency. And then within like 5 years, he was State Farm's top agent in the country. So he really took to insurance and got really good at that. And he was really good at relationships. Like he was really good at like making people feel understood and like cared for by their insurance agent. So he was getting wedding invitations and like people, come backstage at my concert. Like he
It's a
he kind
lot.
of had this like star-like quality to him actually that I still feel that he has, and people love him. They're like, "Oh, babies love him." He's just like one of those people.
That's so
He's a
funny.
very human man, but he has this magnetism. So it was kind of like he had a charm about him a little bit. And so by the time I came along, he was working in New York City as an insurance agent, running his own independent, like his own business. And not it wasn't like we weren't like rolling in money, but
Mhm.
he did pretty well, especially given where he came from. To me, like 7 years after you land in a new country that you don't speak the language, to 7 years later be having an office in Manhattan for your company where you sell insurance is kind of I just am mind blown by that. I'm like, I don't know.
It's incredible.
Wow. I feel, yeah, I don't know why or how he is like that, but it's really impressive to me.
So he didn't really speak to you too much though about his 18 years living
Mm.
across the world and what that was.
No, he has not been super maybe chatty about it, and I can understand why. I think it's an interesting thing to try to dredge up and go through. I know that they were homeless for a few years, and so that, comes with a lot of, I'm sure, difficult social experiences. When my father was a child, an older child. My grandmother had to flee the country and go to Lebanon to escape her husband or her ex-husband. I think they were divorced at that time, who had basically had a gambling addiction and had threatened to like sell my aunt to someone for a gambling debt or something to that effect. It's kind of a wild story. So my grandmother escapes with them, goes to Lebanon, and eventually gets refugee status and comes here. While they were in Lebanon, my dad was in like a sponsored child type of program. And so the guy who sponsored him was, I guess, in the Plymouth Brethren or connected to them in some way. And so when my dad came here, he introduced them to that community. And my dad and the family just got folded in to that. So that was the church I was raised in. And so they met at a Plymouth Brethren conference, and the rest is, it's like a little Christian rom-com dream. And so there is just such a, I think my dad's sort of a miracle story. Whenever I tell it to anyone, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I do not know what it is to suffer, really, when I think about it from that perspective, just for in a primal way. I've been so fortunate, to not feel that feeling of survival being the primary focus of your life. And at that time, they did receive a lot of support from the church. That's who welcomed them in and got them set up and helped them unpack and made them food. That's who, took care of them when they got here. I mean, if they hadn't had that, I don't know, I'm not sure what they would have done. I grew up with, on one hand, like a very strong Middle Eastern part of myself and a very strong religious component. And the two interplayed interestingly in that, like, Middle Eastern culture is known for having very rigid parents, like kind of maybe uh, just intense about expectations about things. And then you have this like rigid religious environment. And so I would say that I grew up in a home that was very committed to, certain types of behavior and being in the world, um, but also a very loving place. But my mom was raised in the Plymouth Brethren, where it was like women do not speak and they keep their heads covered and they are silent at all times. And it was very orderly. And like my dad, was raised Christian Missionary Alliance in Syria. When my father was a child, like an older child, my grandmother had to flee the country and go to Lebanon to escape her husband or her ex-husband. I think they were divorced at that time, who had basically had a gambling addiction and had threatened to like sell my aunt to someone for a gambling debt or something to that effect. It's kind of a wild story. So my grandmother escapes with them, goes to Lebanon, and eventually gets refugee status and comes here. While they were in Lebanon, my dad was in like a sponsored child type of program. And so the guy who sponsored him was, I guess, in the Plymouth Brethren or connected to them in some way. And so when my dad came here, he introduced them to that community. And my dad and the family just got folded in to that. So that was the church I was raised in. And so they met at a Plymouth Brethren conference, and the rest is, it's like a little Christian rom-com dream.
Tell me about as a little girl. I know we touched on this, but were you very aware did you feel different as a little girl, I guess, compared to your friends? Or did you not feel, did you feel just kind of like I'm an American, we're all Americans, we're at school, there's nothing or like that? Or
Hmm.
um I think being a kid is just awkward anyway. Doesn't
Yeah, it
matter
is.
how like what
No,
your
it
family
is.
is, it's
There's
just
always
awkward.
something. So I feel lucky because I feel like a lot of kids who grew up in mixed ethnicity homes didn't have that experience.
Mm,
We're not maybe immersed in the sounds and the flavors of where their parents were from. I grew up in a town in New Jersey where there were a ton of Italian and Irish immigrants. And so I will say that one thing that was cool about living there was that a lot of people had grandmothers who spoke other languages. A lot of people had that experience of their culture being very strong, the Irish flag or the Italian flag and the soccer teams and you know what I mean? There was a lot of cultural identity in general. Now, there weren't necessarily a lot of Arabs where I grew up in the town where I grew up, but there were towns nearby where there were a ton of Arabs, and I had a lot of Arab friends from church. And so I think um, I actually had a cool experience of that
mm,
I don't remember feeling like a total alien in that way. But I think being a Plymouth Brethren kid, the religious environment was more
Yeah.
impactful on my school experience than anything else,
Yeah.
because it was just like I didn't know the cultural references people were saying. Like, so in a way, some immigrants have that experience too. So like but I had it for different reasons. I just wasn't allowed to watch TV or really see anything. So I'm like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what
It's
bands these
so
are. I don't know
interesting.
who any of this music is. I'm just like, what is this kind of music? I don't even know what hip hop is. Like, I didn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, it didn't even register for me. So that was a unique growing up
So
experience, but like a little bit of a late bloomer, but not because my dad's a refugee in that case. It was more
so
because of the
interesting.
church we went to. But
So you have this strong Middle Eastern heritage. It's not just heritage, it's just your day-to-day life. This is the food you're eating, the language you're hearing, but not the religious experience that goes along with that.
right.
Okay, you speak, this is not my assumption, but the assumption are you speak Arabic, you do this, oh, you're a Muslim,
Right.
all of that. Can you speak on that a little bit, looking at the way Americans view that? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you for asking that. It is kind of interesting to be a minority within a minority, because even like I've noticed recently there's a comedian that I've encountered who I think is just incredible, and he mainly does Arabic impressions. He's an Arab kid. He's from Canada, and he will imitate like different types of, you know, the auntie or the uncle or the different, and it's so accurate, and I cry laughing, but I also am like, half of the jokes or some of the references are Muslim
Mm.
references, because they're, you know, it seems that way to me, that I'm like, I don't really relate to that side of it. So it's like I know it's funny, but it's not like funny from my
Yeah,
experience,
right.
if that makes sense. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of modern, because like there's a great show called Rami that I really like, about a first generation Arab kid. And he but he's Muslim. And
Mm.
so well, I love the show, and I love what I've learned about Islamic
Mm.
culture from it. And it's like I don't really relate to that
Mm.
side of the experience. And so there's not a lot of content, media, things that reflect my experience. I
Mm.
feel like it's a very narrow niche of being an immigrant kid. So there's nothing terribly bad about that. It's just, it is like, I do feel like I don't really meet a lot of people who are like me in the ways that I
Like how you were
am.
raised.
Yeah, and like just being half Arab.
But like as a mom now, I'm thinking it's my responsibility to figure out what do I pass on to the next generation of kids? 'Cause it's a huge responsibility in deciding what do we leave behind? What do we not want to bring with us into this?
Right,
They get to choose, right? But the
right.
time that we have to kind of say, this is important to me, I want you to know this. And I feel like, at least for my family, there has been like a drop off of like, we're American. Like you just said, we're American. Um,
Hmm.
how much do you stay connected as a mom? Where, how are you going to handle it? How are you handling?
I think we're very American as well in my house. Like, I make some of the food
Mhm.
actually. That is one way I stay connected, is I make meals that I really liked growing up, and it's probably the way I stay the most connected to it is through the food, for sure. And so they have, but they haven't really benefited from that yet, because they're children who want to eat the same 10 things that they want to eat. So it's like an exposure thing. They don't have a community around them of Arabs like I did, like my aunts and uncles and cousins and people I went to church with. They don't have that. They don't have, like, I've told them about it, you know, and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's so interesting." But that's the extent of their experience with it. And we don't live in a town right here where like there's a lot of that culture there for them to see and experience. And so it is, yeah, they live in a very American house, and they're both blonde and blue-eyed, which Arabs can be.
Yeah, incredible.
But they are only a quarter Arab, not half like me, you know. And so it's just like does seem like they don't really sense their connection to it yet. I think for me, cooking is the way that I held on, and I think that's the way I'd like to teach them to hold on
Mhm.
to it, because it's sort of it's sort of spiritual, dude. I don't know, cooking in general is for
Mhm.
me. So that, I mean, we had a scavenger hunt recently. My uh partner did a scavenger hunt for them, and one of the clues was where does mommy spend the most time? And we were like, oh, the kitchen. This is where I love to be. And I also have to be there quite a bit,
Yeah.
but I really love it. And I think cooking is such a way to connect to your ancestors. It's a way to connect to yourself. It's a, your body, your literal body that you're about to feed with this food. And so my daughter likes to help me. I've invited my son to help me. He has not caught the bug yet as far as in the kitchen cooking, but my daughter loves to help. So I sense that that is where I can really pass on what I know about the flavors of my father's homeland. So that's my only plan right now. But
That's great. Can you tell me
yeah.
about like the quintessential meal then from your household? Because I don't know anything about
Yeah.
Syrian food or
Well, like a lot of cultures, its primary cuisine is a lot of like rustic food, stews and such, like things like that. And which is my favorite. So I love that. But I would say I grew up with like two or three kind of staples. And my favorite one, and one that I've played with a lot, was this like stuffed zucchini dish. So it's
sounds
like hollowed out
amazing.
zucchini with like tomato sauce and ground beef and onions and whatever, and rice to bind it. And then you bake it. So it's sort of like a, yeah, baked rice casserole type of
Sounds
dish.
delicious.
But what sets it apart, I think, from other versions of that I've had, because Polish food has stuff like that too that I love, but their sauces are just flavored totally differently. Arabs put cinnamon in tomato sauce, and that's similar to some portions of like Mexican cooking as well,
Yeah.
like cinnamon and savory stuff. Arabs also do that, and so I think for me the flavor profile of the
Yeah.
spices is what sets it apart from in its own way. And there's some like you can see some overlap with India a little bit, some overlap with Europe because of where it's located. So
Right.
like there's just different. It's so special. I love it. And I wish it was more prevalent because it's actually really delicious. Honestly, my favorite memories are those, the family stuff, like of the cooking day my mom and my aunts would have, where they would just cook all day long and then everyone would take home, a bunch. And I learned a lot from that, and really cherish remembering that I got to do that with people from my dad's country or area of the world. It's pretty cool.
It's beautiful. I think again, like as a mom, I'm thinking like these are the things I want to give to my kids. I'm hearing
Yeah.
this. I'm thinking like I gotta go home and make some stuff for
Yeah.
girls because I think we are so. I mean, we're so American, right? Which means we're so busy and we're so distracted, and I think as I'm trying to reconnect to different roots and hearing people's stories, I'm realizing there wasn't as much of that. It was much more just like we're here together and we're doing this. You and
Right.
me. We're in the kitchen. It's gonna be 3 hours of doing this by hand because it's not frozen. It's not getting
Right.
delivered. And I just really crave that. I think a
Yeah.
lot of us crave that. We're like, well, where did it go? And I think it went with our grandparents and it went
Yeah.
with our
Yeah.
great grandparents and because there's no one else now to round people up. It's us. We have to do it,
Right. Right. Absolutely. And we also live in a cultural time where think the nuclear family, meaning the literal family that lives in the house, like you don't often know your neighbors. Often you don't live close to your family members. Like there's sort of this increasingly disparate nature to the way life is structured. And so we have to sort of return to old practices because they're not really part of our life. Like our grandparents, that was part of their culture. They just did it because that's what everybody did. Now that's not what everybody does, so we have to sort of intentionally return or else it'll disappear. And that's where you find grandchildren of immigrants are suddenly waking up to their heritage and saying, wait, I don't want this to die with them. I want to be able to hold on to where I come from. I mean, I feel like I hear that all the time, and we have all these movies that are like coming out that are in a beautiful way, just encouraging the flourishing of these different cultures that have made it here.
Oh
It's
gosh, I'm like
beautiful.
I feel like I'm like goosebumps all throughout because I feel like you're saying what I feel, but I can't quite get it out as beautifully.
It's a
Go start.
beautiful thing to do,
Yeah.
including for people who are white people. I
Yeah.
think,
Oh,
you know
absolutely.
what I'm saying?
All
Like all
people.
people
Yeah.
deserve to know and feel connected to where they come
I'm
from,
so
I
glad you
think.
said that part. What would you say to people? Because there are a lot of people that are on my channel that if they want to reconnect to their family, they're hungry for it,
Yeah.
they don't know what to do. What would you say starting tomorrow? Do this. What advice could you give?
I mean, feel like it's predictable, but I'm going to hammer home the food thing. If I happen to be making something that comes from my own culture, I feel the connection in the making, in the process of doing it, and then in the eating of it. It's like I'm giving myself a dose of it,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And so, and because food is such a gathering thing, then what I've done is I've passed this I made up a recipe, for example, over the course of several years that's based on that stuffed zucchini dish, but I've deconstructed it and made it into a curry, a type of a dish, but same
Same thing.
flavor profile as where a lot of the same ingredients, but it's just made in a different way. And I've like made it for people and dropped it off to new mothers, and I've made it for friends who are coming for dinner, and then they're like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" I share the recipe, and to me that's how like I can proliferate what I come from. It's how I can commune with it. So that would be my first advice. I think getting in the kitchen and just making things you remember eating or that you know your parents ate or whatever is such a easy, fast way to get there into like not just thinking about it, but being with it. I feel like food is the thing.
It's the reconnecting with this is how your family, for however many generations, they've been doing the same thing.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I think that this identity conversation is a little paralyzing sometimes because it's sort of like it's all up here. Like, who do I identify as? And I'm not saying I don't believe in that. I think there's a way to be with something more than you have to know why you identify with it or how. There's sort of like a mind game we can get sucked into of trying to like figure out who we are. And I am saying that as a chronic overthinker about who I am and who I'm supposed to be and what my identity is.
Same.
Chronic. So like I'm saying this to myself. Whenever I can figure out a way to be with instead of think about, it is a win. And so food is a way to do that. And it's a way to do that with people, not to be sitting around necessarily talking about identity, but instead you're sitting down and sharing a meal that comes from tradition. So like it's just infusing your life with it versus making it the thing you're hanging on your wall. It doesn't have to be that way.
I've
Yeah.
never thought about it that way. And I
I love
actually
that.
feel so like freed hearing you say that just because
Mhm.
it's just there is a lot of pressure. I think as an American, you're an American, but you want to hold on to all these different threads, and some of them are so disparate. Some of them don't go together. It's like ingredients that don't mix, and you're like, how do I mix these things? And yet here you are. They are mixed. Um,
They
and
are.
and and it's okay.
It is okay. I think, man, I feel food is such a well, think about it. Like when someone has a baby, what do people do? They set up a meal train, right? So that you can drop off home cooked food to them, ideally, because it's nourishing. Not
Mhm.
just because it's home cooked, but because people are putting love into it. Like it is so, I believe in that. I'm like, I don't know what it does. I just know it does
It does.
something. And I think food is such a one of the saddest things about losing touch with our cultures is that they are often very food centric and meal centric cultures that provide, gosh, like in an age of pop psychology and like I love psychology. I go to therapy like it's my job. But there is something I'm after in life, which is a balance of what we know now about the mind and about trauma and about all these different things about identity. Like, I want to balance that with the old ways too,
Mm.
of like hands in the dirt, cooking the meal, like sharing the meal, eating from the same dish, whatever those things are, I want them both. I don't want to be so thoroughly modern that I've lost touch with what it means to just be simple. It's like modern life is not simple.
No, it's not.
And all cultures, when you trace them far back enough, have simplicity at their heart, I think. And so meals are a way to get there.
They are.
I am an Arab living my life. This is now part of Arab culture because I'm an Arab. So it's
Mhm.
not just this one thing that it was, and now we have to totally preserve it as it was.
Mhm.
It gets to grow with us. You know what I'm saying? So like maybe in 50 years they'll be writing history books about how, people of your identity or mine influenced culture because of where they came from. Like there's so much that we
Absolutely.
can't see about ourselves because we're like right in it.
Oh, it's so
And
true.
so you're being who you are by just living too, so I think it's good to balance it with that because it's no good to get caught up in shame. Like I really relate, about if I'm doing this right, am I
Yeah.
performing my identity correctly?
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
like, oh, I just want to be myself, that's the goal.